Hi, Lisa Schermerhorn here with the Grassroots Warrior Network, and I am thrilled and excited to introduce you to Kerry Cassidy. She's the founder and CEO of the project Camelot. She's an investigative journalist, a documentary filmmaker, and producer, along with a whole lot of other things around extraterrestrial UAPs, UFOs, anything you want to know. She was really groundbreaking. You've been doing this for a long time, before anyone else was, and I'd love to find out really what was it that you brought that because you started out in Hollywood, correct?
Yes, I worked for 20 years in Hollywood and then made a transition to pick up a consumer grade camcorder and start interviewing. Actually, it's all about conspiracies of all kinds. So it's
Right.
not only UFOs and
Okay.
AETs, although I certainly have a specialty in that, but also whistleblowers from above top secret. That
That's
is my
right.
specialty, as well as what we call the Secret Space Program, which is SSP. So all of that, and I get into politics. I mean, I get into health. I was very active during the COVID crisis, whatever you want to call that, hoax crisis, whatever. And that's when my YouTube channel with 70 million viewers worldwide was deleted off YouTube. And so now I have a couple small that I've just YouTube channels that I just started with, not very many videos because they gave them back to me supposedly. But, that's how that went back in the day. So, yeah. So did I answer your question that you were really asking me there or not?
Well, what brought you into the conspiracy? Because you started out in Hollywood. What, was there some incident or something that happened that prompted you to suddenly get into conspiracies?
Well, I actually became a journalist in college. So, unlike most of the podcasters out there, I am a trained journalist. And I was interested even then in any kind of conspiracies because I've always known that our world is not what it seems. And that there was so much that were so many lies being told to us. And so I guess I was motivated to reveal some of those mysteries. But what happened was I went into Hollywood to make movies, sci-fi movies, actually. As a kid, I saw Close Encounters of the Third Kind and was very inspired by that movie. In fact, so inspired that I actually thought when I walked out of the theater that the whole world would have changed, that everyone knew what I knew, and that there were ETs and so on and so forth, and actually found out that nothing had changed. So ever since that time, I vowed that I wanted to make sci-fi blockbuster type movies. That was what my goal was. And but I reached a glass ceiling in Hollywood where I really couldn't go beyond a certain point because I hadn't gotten involved with what you call the old boys network back in those days. And that was headed up by Spielberg, of course, who is now going to be coming out with another alien movie on, I think it's June 12th. So I packaged projects. I got to the point where I was packaging projects. I had some great projects. Even people that ended up to be my whistleblowers, I was packaging projects like for Dan Sherman, for example, and he wrote a book called Above Black, and I got involved with Dan and told him that I would like to, I got the rights as a producer, but you just pay like $20 or something, and then you have the rights, and you don't pay the whole fee unless the thing goes forward, which none of my projects went forward, but I had worked in Hollywood when I was doing that for at least, I think it was around, 12 to 15 years. So eventually worked in Hollywood for 20 years, but I couldn't get projects off the ground because I was not in this old boys network. And I also wrote several screenplays. I was what you call a back pocket client of Spielberg's agent in CAA at the time. So I did make some progress. I went to film school and so on and so forth. So what do I say here? Whoa, what has happened? Hold on. Sorry, another application just opened up.
It's
Kind of
okay.
games on the computer. So anyway, yeah. So that's I came from that background, and then I got involved in picking up a consumer grade camcorder. I decided I was going to make my own documentary, and what I was going to do that was kind of unusual, at least at that time, was go around to UFO conferences and interview the speakers. This is not the, this is like 20 years ago, and it wasn't common to do it that way. And I just put the little camera in front of their face during the breaks and started asking them questions. And the people that were speaking at the conference that where I started doing that were actually people like Rich Dolan, Stephen Bassett, all kinds of different people that are actually well known on the circuit now as well as then. And no one was doing that sort of thing. So it was fun. And I did make the documentary and released it. It's on my website. So I started out as a journalist, approaching them as a journalist and asking them because I noticed during the conference that when they went on stage, they never talked about seeing UFOs themselves. And yet they talked all about UFOs and how they were motivated, running and all of that in the skies. So I started my documentary with "Have you seen a UFO?" Simple question, and then from there on started the interview with each and every person. So it's actually a really fun video. It's fun to see people that maybe you haven't even heard their personal stories with regard to UFOs, but you know them as a researcher or investigator or author. Many of them, like Rich Dolan has written many books, and so on and so forth. So I was always going down that angle, and as I say, trying to uncover the mystery and the truth behind the lies, actually. And eventually I teamed up with Bill Ryan, who became my first partner in this endeavor. We only lasted for about 2.5 years. And then we had, I don't know, what do you want to call it? Dissension in the ranks. He had a girlfriend who wanted him to be the star, lead interviewer. And with my journalist background, I was the natural lead interviewer. But, I did teach him how to use the consumer grade camcorder that we were using. We traveled around actually in Europe with his old station wagon crossing because he was English and we would cross the channel and then go interview people in person. That was also not being done. We kind of started the whole trend of truth telling through video, I guess you might say. So that continued, but eventually we disagreed on who to interview. We had all these issues, and so we had to split up. And so I took over Camelot and he went and started or continued what we had started together, which was the Avalon Forum, which was more of a place where you could go to discuss things. And I wasn't really into that anyway. So he's still heading up the Avalon Forum. Okay. In
Wow.
fact, it's still out there, and Project Camelot has grown, just astronomically, been a huge channel. And then, of course, getting knocked off YouTube. But then I put everything, farmed it out because it got picked up by Odyssey.com, Rumble, and it's so we're still trying to consolidate all my interviews, but there's something like there might be as many as 3,000. I really don't know because I can't get a straight answer from anyone to explain because it's just when you get knocked off a major channel, and at that point we put all our videos on YouTube
Yeah.
in those days. And so we had to farm out to these different things, BitChute. So I have some on Odyssey, some on BitChute, and a lot of Rumble. I made Rumble my main channel because BitChute is too slow, Odyssey is too slow, and so that's what I did. But it's been difficult because of the large library of material that I have.
But you also have your own website where you have things stored, correct?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
But they are
So,
linked. The way it works is the videos are embedded in the pages on my website.
oh,
And
okay.
therefore they actually are coming from places like Rumble, Odyssey, and like fed
Okay.
into my website from there because they have the platform, the video platform. And what happens is that those links on those pages have been, when I do a video and it's controversial, they attacked us. They attacked our server many times. We had to get a new server, all these different things, the powers that be, right?
Yeah.
So, over the years, there's been a lot of destruction. So I'm currently trying to I'm currently trying to hire somebody to fix the links to these various places, if you understand.
Nice.
And I
Absolutely.
know it's getting a bit technical here, but it is a huge job because in theory, I have 6,000 pages on my website, and every
Wow.
page should have at least most every page has a video.
Wow. So I wanted to ask you, with all that, information that you started getting when you were interviewing them all, at what point did you start to realize you might be in dangerous territory? And really go, uh-oh, I might be in danger. Some of these people might be in danger. And why is this so secret?
No, we always knew we were in danger. In fact, our pact initially, Bill Ryan and myself, were that we both agreed that we didn't care if we got killed because we were going to tell the truth against all odds. So we had that from the very get-go. In fact, we constructed our website with that in mind. That we have this section of the old website, which you can still see. You go to the main page, the main site, which is projectcamelotportal.com, and on the left you can click on the channels and you'll see what they call the legacy channels, and you can watch and you can go see that we had a whole section about not committing suicide. So we were very
Wow.
I guess ahead of the times in understanding, but it wasn't surprising because UFO technology and just as it's happening now, these scientists and engineers that you're hearing about right now that are disappearing and being shot in the head and so on and so forth, that was going on then as well.
Right.
But so we have, Phil Schneider and William Cooper, and there was a legacy of ufologists who had been threatened, killed, disappeared, so on. So we were well prepared for that, just going right out of the gate.
Yeah, you mentioned that when we met at the Awakening Summit in New York, you talked about even David Wilcock, who was really instrumental for me in the beginning. Actually, both of you. Like once COVID happened and we were locked down, my friend Barry and I would just sit and watch hours and hours and hours of you and David.
Oh, that's good to
And
hear.
so we were like, what do we do with all this information? But, I had no idea, how dangerous this was and what was involved. And then you get into the above top secret. If you want to talk how many levels there are above the president, like how much power does the president even have?
Right. Except that in the Trump administration, that has changed somewhat. So, but yes, all the presidents, many people have talked about this and written about it, that most of the presidents, in fact, were not fully read in, as we call it. Kennedy, however, was in the early days because he came up through really the Illuminati area. And so he had certain people that brought him under their wing, including Nixon, for example. And Nixon was very involved in the Bay of Pigs and the Cuban Missile Crisis, which did involve Grays. And a lot of people still don't know that to this day.
Wow.
And Eisenhower, Nixon was Eisenhower's right hand, so of course he was very involved in the whole ET influence over Eisenhower. And so, all of this was going on. MJ-12, you might have heard of them. And
The Majestic 12. Yeah.
yes, and MJ-12 and all of the different, it goes by many names, by the way,
Mhm.
now. But the bottom line is that researchers have found documents that verify their existence. And that was put together by Truman. So you're really going back in time.
Wow.
And so all of this was already happening. And both Bill and I came at this as researchers in our own separate worlds. And then we met up when I invited him because he was representing the Serpo.org project. He became a sort of a spokesperson because he signed up to put on a website all of the what there were releases that were coming actually from the DIA. So he had just been a web guy. But as time went on, the serpo.org releases got, out on the internet, and people wanted to talk to somebody, but there was no one who was representing that project. So Bill just kind of fell into it because he had built the website and was quite an expert he's very good at remembering details and cross-correlating papers. So that's what he was involved in, and that's why I interviewed him, and that's how I met him. It was a conference that we were at, which was at the Flamingo Hotel, as I recall. And so it was a yearly conference, and both ended up on what's called a news group. And to this day, it's unclear how we got on there because we were invited. You could only get on the news group by being invited. And so we had we met, we hadn't started Camelot. I had started interviewing whistleblowers and trying to make my documentary. So he got on there for some other reason that I don't know. He was selected because he was researching, I guess, Serpo. That's why. So I just saw his name. I saw that he was representing Serpo, and so I decided I would make that one of my documentary interviews that I was already making.
And what is Serpo? What does Serpo stand for?
So Serpo is actually the alien human exchange program that's depicted at the end of the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which was actually true, not false. It's like they do in Hollywood. They seed truth into movies. Okay. Mm-hmm. They've been doing this forever. And of course, the Spielberg movie Close Encounters. So at the very end, you see Dreyfus lining up with the aliens and getting ready to get on an alien craft. So supposedly there were, in the 60s, the secret space program was involved in several projects of human alien exchanging, where the humans would supposedly suit up and go to their planets and they would come to ours, but they didn't talk about that part. So that is what he was documenting by his taking the releases. The releases were coming through, like I said, the DIA. So they were officially coming through an intelligence agency. And that's a long saga I won't get into now, but that is how he and I connected. And then we agreed. I had a small inheritance from my mother and flew to Europe to go to tour with Jordan Maxwell and William Henry, Egypt. And they were looking for the signs of Atlantis in Egypt at the time. Mm-hmm. And I was always very fascinated in my life by Atlantis. So I took a good part of my inheritance and took that trip. During the trip, I actually interviewed Jordan Maxwell about aliens. And he had never done an interview up to that point revealing his investigations with aliens. He was already, Manly P. Hall and all into the Illuminati and what we call the deep state and the various information about all of that. So he had that he was immersed in that, but he didn't talk about the alien side. It's a serendipity as things happened for me that I ended up, I guess you might say, being at the right place at the right time. He did an interview with me in a temple in Egypt, but he said to me, "You'll never be able to release this to the general public until I tell you," and it might be years. And indeed, it was years later when he allowed me to release that interview. So, sorry, it's everything I've done. It's pretty long-winded.
No, I enjoy
the
it.
Questions.
But you touched on Greys and Bay of Pigs and all that. Can you give us a little snippet? Because I was like, what?
Oh, all right.
How were the Greys involved with that?
Well, the Greys came to Eisenhower and offered to make a deal, and Eisenhower made a deal with the Greys. That's, and the rest is history, if you want to say. But they basically made a deal to allow for humans to be abducted. And now the Greys there's supposedly a good side of the grays and the programmable entities, which are AI, and then there's a negative side of the grays, and they're called the rogue grays, and they were all about abducting humans. But they didn't tell the military that. They just made a deal of some kind with our military and through Eisenhower when he met, aliens, at that base, whatever base it was at the time. So that's a famous story.
Right.
And that was our first interaction after Roswell, supposedly, with the aliens. Okay. So what happens is they actually made a deal to be allowed to abduct humans, to take our DNA. And they were supposed to return the abductee to their bed with that and wipe their memory. But that all went south because lots of people ended up having recovered memories of being abducted. And in fact, I was one of them. And so what happens is that deal fell apart. And what happened also was I mean, I hate to say this, but they were eating and using our blood and our what they call loosh, the fluids from our glands are considered an aphrodisiac to these dreadful beings, and that's what they were really doing. So then Dan Burish came along. We interviewed a guy named Dan Burish who worked in the military complex and was part of MJ-12 actually. But he was a microbiologist, I believe. And I've done several interviews with him. And basically his story is that eventually they had to make another deal with the aliens, get them to leave the United States people alone, which they never totally did, but mainly to give them complete access to south of the border. And this is where you get the X-Men stories that came out in movies, and specifically the Logan movie, that if you've ever seen it, if you haven't, you should go back and watch it. And you will know that, it's all about that alien human hybrid group down in south of the border who were then coming through the border into our country. And they are here now. And this is all why the border was such a big to-do. Of course, they never told you the real reason. They didn't want people coming in, especially undetected across our border. But that was sort of a lie as well. And I can get into all sorts of things like that. But
Right.
anyway, the bottom line is that the Greys went down to South and Central America, and they really went full force with their abduction program to abduct humans, to use them as food and all that kind of thing, as well as change their genetics. And what their objective was to create a gray human hybrid that would sort of rescue their race, because they had emphasized, actually turned off emotion from their genome and their, emphasis in developing their race. And they needed the genetics that we had to heal their race. So this program has been very successful, and we have tons of gray human hybrids who are now really, this has been going on so many years, since the 1940s, probably, this official program. But you can imagine that these people are now, they started out as babies, obviously, and young children, and that now they're, in their 50s, actually, and older.
So do they walk amongst us, or are they kept
Yes.
separately?
No, they're human. I mean, for all
Okay.
intents and purposes, most of them look human. Here and there, you will see a gray human hybrid that looks, has like really big eyes and stuff. You've seen those
Okay.
pictures. And, also these children took on a lack of emotion, a lack of empathy, you see, and they also have special abilities, which gets into the X-Men scenario, especially things like teleporting objects, across a room, that kind of thing,
Wow.
and other things, which we don't even know the full depth of the aliens abilities, if you will. But those children grew up having those abilities,
So do
some or
these
another.
children, are they being looked after, or are they randomly in families and having these abilities and people are like,
Yeah,
my kid does?
there's an author called David Jacobs who made this his complete focus of all his books. And I think he's still alive, although we don't hear from him much, so I don't know if he's still alive. But he basically got involved in interviewing all these alien human hybrids from this program that became known in the UFO community that such a program had happened, the alien abduction programs. And they go all over the world, actually, but they seem, for whatever reason, to concentrate first in the United States and then in Central and South America.
Wow. So you mentioned that you were abducted and because I've heard that most people who are abducted do have their memories wiped. So do you remember all of your abduction and what the purpose
No,
of you or parts of it?
no, but I used to. When it at least it came into my consciousness when I was 12. I somehow I was having nightmares all the time, and the nightmare was that there was a man in a black top hat and a black long coat, and he was behind a picket fence, and I would walk out of a pathway that my house didn't really have, but towards the picket fence, and I would get this very loud buzzing sound, which is a very giveaway that you're being abducted. And then as I got closer and closer to the man in the gate, I would wake up and I would be, terrified. So I had that repeatedly for, a few years. And then I decided that I was going to open the gate and just find out what was scaring me so much, so to speak. So I had a dream, vision, or whatever you want to call it, where I did that, and I went through the gate, and they stopped. All that stopped.
Wow.
So, but I have had interactions with aliens through the years. And so they were not the only ones. And what seems to happen, and it happened to Ashiana Dean this way, she's a wonderful contactee
Yeah.
of what are called the guardian races. And it turns out that I'm in touch with them as well. At any rate, that she was sort of rescued from the same kind of abduction scenario. So somehow something went down and it stopped. But I have an implant that hasn't gone away since that time. I have it in my arm, and I have a network of capillaries when I was born that shows that I think, I was actually being, I call it it's MILABed, in my mother's stomach before I was actually born. So something went on where they were trying to do something to me.
Wow.
And so I have this sort of weird birthmark on my shoulder. So yeah, so I was involved in that when I was very young. And I just, some memories came back to me as I got into Camelot, and started to do the research and talk to the people, the whistleblowers. I realized that it was my background was involved with that. And I would have sort of flash memories come back. But one thing that came back was that I was involved with one whistleblower he worked at Moffett Field his whole life underground, which is in Palo Alto, California. And I was born in Palo Alto in Stanford Hospital, which is a military hospital on Moffett Field. So I was the only kid in my family that was born there. So somehow they did some kind of MILAB stuff to me, which was the military side of the abduction. So, but probably alien as well. So anyway, that I have that background, and I had some telltale dreams about that kind of stuff. And so one time then in the real world, when I was, I think maybe around 12 or a little older than 12, I went on a school, day trip where they take you in a bus and you go driving around to wherever they take you that on the tour that day. And We pulled up at Ames Research Lab, which is on the Moffett Field base. And I got out of the bus. I looked at the front of the building and I said, "Oh, I know this place." And I have
Wow.
no idea how I knew the place, but I've had that kind of thing happen with me, and so on. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
You
I
also,
wait, I forgot part of
yeah.
that story. So the other part was that I interviewed a man years later called Norm Bergram, and he's written. Let's see. Let's see the something of Saturn. Anyway, he wrote about Saturn and these ships in and around the rings of Saturn. Yeah, it's called the Ring Makers of Saturn. And we were told about him by John Lear when I interviewed John Lear, who was one of my early interviews. I did several interviews with John Lear. They're absolutely fabulous. He was quite a charming, amazing storyteller. And so he told us about a guy named Norm Bergram, who was a scientist who lived in Palo Alto, who, wrote this book called Rainmakers of Saturn, and how he had a high, regard for him, and how the military were involved then in building holograms of stuff. And so we went to interview, or I went. I was no longer with Bill Ryan, but I had a couple. My webmaster came, and another guy to help me. And so we went to interview Norm Bergram, who lived in Palo Alto, in his house, and his wife had passed on. He was something like 93, something really old, but he was smart as a whip, really small little man, and basically told me about working underground in Moffett Field all those years. And I said during the interview, "Oh, I was, MILABed over in Moffett Field," or whatever I said. And he looked at me with such a look that, I mean, practically stopped the interview and said, sort of nodded his head like that. And I knew, and, that he
Wow.
knew what I was talking about. And then he talked about, the fact that he'd been working in black projects there for his whole life, which is his whole science life, and was about, he thought that the interview that he was doing with me was just the beginning of many interviews, and that everything was coming public, and that he was going to be given in his own lab, and he was all excited. And instead they basically took him out of his house, and he's never seen the light of day since. He absolutely disappeared.
Wow.
So,
How many interviewees has that happened to you where you've interviewed people and have they disappeared?
well, I don't think most of them didn't disappear in my case of these people. They were on
Right,
the circuit for a long time,
right.
but we have had people who died, and they've had early deaths. So I believe that I can make a list, of the
Wow.
ones that have been killed. You know, basically Pete Peterson's wife went first. Um, yeah. Gordon Neville, he went into the hospital with something wrong with his toe, never came out. I talked to him the night before he died. He was fine, other than, this some kind of injury, weird injury, and then that was it. He was gone. He was dead. I mean, sure, you could say he's dead or missing because you didn't know, but the story was that he was dead.
Oh,
The daughter believes he died.
right,
She doesn't believe what I believe.
right.
um, about how he died and things like that. And so there's been a whole list of Camelot witnesses, as we call them, who have passed on.
And it's just amazing to me how courageous you are to have continued to do this work. And I know it is. I mean, there are a lot of people who would have given up and run away. And I was always curious, like, why the whole lunar landing and the 1960s, ship and all of that, whatever people want to believe, whether it was real or hoax or whatever, when we were already having space travel, why this huge cover up and then put this story up and then even what was just recently done with Artemis.
Yeah. So, this whole alien disclosure, in a way, it's linked, of course, with free energy. And free energy, what they use to power the UFOs, is like that would change everything about our Earth and the way we live. So we live on surface Earth in a very old fashioned, they still talk about, I mean, Elon Musk is a, limited hangout to convince Americans and people that we use old-fashioned technology to this day, so that we're going into space with these rockets that are powered by, rocket fuel and fire and all of that. It's all bullshit. And in order to go out into space, you also have to jump through a Stargate wormhole. So that's how you travel in space. And this is outed a long time ago that
Right.
you had to bend space time to actually travel. You don't go in a straight line. So that's all bullshit. So the thing is that there's a competition to do with alien reverse engineered technology
Right.
to this day, to where we don't also want other countries to get their hands on this technology, because it also involves weapons and can be converted into weapons very easily. And so that's part of the issue, that the military is always trying to be secretive about the technology and covert, very covetous, I guess you might say, of the technology, and not letting other governments get their hands on it
Yeah.
with a limited success. And so we went to the moon. You can watch my interview with William Tompkins,
Yep.
which is like a 4-hour interview, and he's an excellent Navy. He was working for Navy intelligence really his whole life. He was involved in NASA. He was involved in designing ships to go to the moon and other places. I mean, we have this thing called the secret space program, in which we are going, interstellar, we're going interdimensional, we're jumping through space, a lot like Star Trek or Battlestar Galactica or whatever you'd like to choose. We have clones and the whole 9 yards. I mean, that's a lot of that's in my interview with William Tompkins and others. So I have countless, corroborations, you might say, but these people don't know each other, who have come to me as Camelot to tell their stories, and their stories all match. Okay, so I have multiple verifications on a lot of the details of all of this. And I can tell you that we were told right out of the gate by one of our top whistleblowers called Henry Deacon. We had gave him a fake name in the beginning, eventually came out and even came on stage at one of my conferences. His real name was Arthur Neumann. And I believe he's actually related to, I guess it was John von Neumann. So I think, because that's such a close name. And he spelled his name slightly differently. But nonetheless, he was heavily involved in the secret space program. We verified his information. And he gave us a great deal of information and basically explained how we went to the moon with help, which was ET help. Okay, so our astronauts, even William Tompkins says when they landed, they were met by a greeting party of reptilian aliens standing next to their ships, basically saying, "Get out of here." And so that was what there was really finding on the moon. That's why they had to fake the moon landing with all the bullshit. And they used the filmmaker, whatever his name is, I always forget.
I know. It just went blank
But
on me
this,
too.
very famous
Yes.
filmmaker, and obviously so he made a scenario in which you don't have to see all the aliens and the alien ships that they encountered, but we did have to leave, and that's why we haven't gone back much, supposedly. But that's also a
Right.
cover story, because we have a base on the moon, on the dark side, I believe, of the moon, and so on. And Randy Kramer is a whistleblower who talked about working there and on Mars, actually battling aliens on Mars. And we go interstellar, so we have colonies that we've been building. All of the secrets of the secret space program are, well, some people say that they're 10,000 years in advance of surface Earth. So we are living, and they are keeping us stunted and stupid all these years about the technology and things that all the problems on Earth that could be solved, greening of the deserts, you name it. And of course, getting rid of food shortages and all that bullshit. So understanding that the dark side of this plan and several alien groups who kept it in place, along with many humans that are their minions, and then religion, which is a big one, to keep us stupid. And so that has actually been very successful.
Stanley Kubrick. It just like popped
Very
into
great.
my
Yes. And
head.
Kubrick.
Yeah, he's admitted to it on film that he did stage it, so people
Yeah,
can find that. Um, so yeah, I had heard that story about the moon landing and that they had said get out of here. So yeah, I don't know. Did you get a chance to see Chris O'Connor's talk about that he actually was? So he was,
oh, well, I saw him, you mean at the
yeah,
conference?
at the
Yes.
conference. Yeah,
I've invited him on my show as a result, but
yeah.
what are you talking to about
No, that
specific?
he was actually taken and brought to one of the a station off of Saturn, and he was part of the 20 and back program,
Uh-huh.
where they took him at 2 years old and then age progressed him,
Sure.
and then he had a job where he was negotiating with other species, and then they brought him back.
Yes,
They age
I
progressed him back
understand.
to two. Yeah,
Yeah, his story. I mean, I did hear him talk about his story. I think I do want to have him on my show because I think there are a lot of gaps there. But he seems like a legitimate guy, you know.
yeah. No, he's a really wonderful guy. Well, if you think about the technology, what is it, the American soldier who was rescued in Iran, they talk about the fact that they found his signature. They found him through his heartbeat signature, and that's how they were able to find him. I mean, that's not our current technology. I don't know if you'd heard anything about that.
No, I hadn't heard that. Mm-mm. I know that they found well, both. There were two of them
Yeah,
that disappeared in after being shot down in Iran. But how they found them, I don't think I had actually heard that part.
yeah. So I don't know, how much is our Space Force really ET technology?
Well, like I said, there's supposed to be about 10,000, according to my whistleblowers,
Yeah.
who, in essence, work for them or have worked for them for sometimes, 40 years, and basically have a crisis of conscience. They are retired, so there's this sort of pattern that started to happen, and where we hit the scene at the exact same moment that these guys were hitting, sort of starting to, I guess, speak in public. And some of them ended up coming to us. And I had a particular way of interviewing that seemed to bring out their testimony, maybe more so than normal. And that led to our success. So I have very famous interviews with these people that their memories would also come back. So there's a syndrome in which Duncan O'Finioan talked about. He was one of the first super soldiers. And he talked about when you hit your 50s, there is a thing that happens with the brain where even where they've done mind wipes up to then, you start recovering in memories.
Mm.
And so that's a pattern that happened to him and apparently other abductees and people that were involved in, because they even now they're wiping memories of people that had go and fight on Mars and other planets, etc., and work for us. So that's a common occurrence, that apparently.
So much to absorb for people who have never heard of this before. And I think about when we were at the Awakening Summit, and this poor woman was sitting next to me, and she thought she was there for just the topic of trafficking children, and suddenly she was hearing all this. How do we help people kind of take this information in? I mean, you've been immersed in it for so long, but I mean,
Right.
without people's heads exploding, how do you think this whole disclosure is going to start happening?
Well, it's kind of a mixed bag, because in many ways, Hollywood and television, and movies have been releasing actually a lot of this stuff so that people that are hearing this now that are really in the dark and didn't know anything about it can always refer to what they say it's like a sci-fi movie or TV show they saw. A lot of incoming children and even, probably young adults and maybe older adults realized at the time that what they were really seeing was true. So, in some ways, that was a disclosure project of a sort. So, the shock, I think it worked to serve humanity in many ways, and continues to do so. They continue to release all kinds of secret stuff in movies and television shows. And those are often the most popular, by the way, like James Bond, for example, and you name it. But the thing is that now a lot of those people also have abduction memories that they have buried and never visited, and so they're also going to have a certain amount of shock happen to them because they will recover memories if they don't reject them out of hand. Now, there's also this incredible, and I talk a lot about this, programming coming from the religion. So religion has kept people in the dark and made sure that even if they stumbled on, paranormal events or even aliens, like they say, all the aliens are demons, So they brush them away as if they're non-entities, they're not corporeal, they are not, which is wrong because aliens are not demons. Demons don't have bodies. Now, a demon can take over an alien body, but not have it originally. So it's like a possession scenario. But at any rate, I mean, everyone, to me, it just seems so obvious. I mean, Roswell was a huge story, and they debunked that over and over again about, balloons. But there's a TV series called Roswell that does very well and has done very well. There's been umpteen alien movies trying to disclose various things about, and that's how the grays, the little image of the little gray became so famous. And, certain books where people were reading the books like Whitley Strieber, his story. And so it's gone through a lot of permutations over the years. So I think there's most people who will have heard of something, if Roswell or whatever. And this is where now it's come to such a fevered pitch that the UAP hearings, for example, that's a government, with Congress. Those are absolutely top military people, top flyers, like David Fravor and showing craft. They always show the Tic Tac, which is a whole story in itself. But basically, there have been so many movies and TV shows and memorabilia in stores and all these kind of things. And so, the round UFO is absolutely become, especially since the 1950s. Okay, it really hit the public, the general public. And I think that a lot of kids who are older now, they'd be, at least in maybe even their 70s or 80s.
Yeah.
Grew up during the 50s when actually the alien sort of openness about the aliens coming was a lot more open and free than it even is now. So there were lots of authors that came forward saying, I was picked up by aliens and given all these tours of things and various things. And, there's so much to that. So I don't think we're starting from ground zero with this story. I think there are people who have been in denial over it for various reasons. But if you understand everything that I talk about, then you can also understand that we are aliens. We have alien DNA. We are hybrids. And this goes way back. And in fact, a new, I guess it's a video. I just released it with an article on my site, having to do with this investigation they're always looking for ancient artifacts, right?
Right.
And so don't forget Ancient Aliens, that show. I mean, all of
Yeah.
this has been preparing the ground, to have disclosure, as we call it,
Right.
where the government actually acknowledges it. Now, we don't know how well they're going to do. They might, put us two steps back. In fact, you never know. But assuming that some steps will be made by Trump disclosing a certain amount of information, but we have, just volumes and volumes of stuff. And just my interviews alone have absolutely top whistleblowers have been vetted. And, all you have to do is watch my channel and you'll learn everything you need to know. But
Right.
but most people, of course, don't do that. They, farm around and find out other things everywhere else, so which is fine. But so this is the thing is that I don't think it's going to be a shock to people. I think the people that are in denial, especially the religious group, who like to think they're demons and like to think that they're, like they don't have real, they're not real. Well, we have bodies, physical bodies of these beings. Okay. And David Grush, one of the top whistleblowers who spoke to the UAP hearings, testified to that. And he has tons of whistleblowers who came to him the way whistleblowers came to us back in the day. So he has all their testimonies as well. And most of them have what you would call impeccable, and their records have been checked and rechecked, or they never would have even gotten close to David Grush, and they gave him their stories. Now, some of their stories, parts of their stories, like with Michael Herrera, who's quite a well-known whistleblower at this point in the UAP hearings, I believe, they whitewashed his actual story. So his actual story was about stumbling on a group of military all in black, so they didn't have an insignia saying what military they belonged to. And they were in the jungles of Indonesia and stumbled upon this military group that had a UFO on the back of a truck that they were in the process of moving, and humans in cages they were going to be taken off planet. So he doesn't tell that part of it. So, some of it made it out through, there's some British newspapers that occasionally will visit a UFO story and tell initially the truth, and then they will whitewash it through the months and years later, and you won't get the straight story in the later days. But Camelot I've gathered a lot of that stuff, and so have others. So we have nothing but truth tellers now. There's a
Right.
whole movement on Earth with all these people on videos, some coming forward from Black projects, giving further testimony on the secret space program and how it works, etc. So again, the ones that are really religiously blinded by what is in essence the Anunnaki, and this is the new evidence that has come forward, which is what they call the hidden tablets of Enki that are cuneiform, going back to Sumeria, that actually told the whole story of how humans were basically invaded and genetically re-engineered by the Anunnaki. And then Anunnaki established the kingships. So when you think of a king or a queen or blue blood, and the
Blue blood, yeah.
Anunnaki were humanoid reptilian hybrids. So they originally were humanoids. Most humanoids in our sector of the galaxies come from Lyra initially. And then in the case of the Pleiades, they went to the Pleiades, settled the Pleiades, a certain group. It's a Nordic line, I think you might call it, sort of. But the Pleiades are famous, the Pleiades star system and all that.
Right.
So they had a rogue group that left them, traveled to Nibiru, established a society there, and then were invaded by the Draco reptilians, who what they do is fly from planet to planet and basically put their DNA into the inhabitants and take them over and also use them as food and so on and so forth. So this is a pattern that is known, and I have whistleblower testimony on this story. as well as all the rest of it. So what I'm saying here is that the religion, and this gets into something, that I know is very controversial, but I am, I know I'm right. The Bible is written by the Anunnaki, okay, and the priests who are under the thumb of the Anunnaki back in the day. So they took over ruling humans when they came and genetically engineered us. And that was before the Bible. And then the Bible eventually came out. It had these stories and this God, and the God of the Bible is Anu, the father of Enki and Enlil, and all of that came out with Zechariah Sitchin in his books,
Right.
with other investigators into the Sumerian tablets. It's the same story, so it doesn't matter who wants to translate it, it's still the story. And there's lots of validations of it. So what we're looking at is these humans that specifically in Israel. So that's why they like to blame Israelis for a lot of what's going on in the Middle East and also affects the rest of the world. Well, it turns out that the Middle East has major stargates.
Yes.
It's a very, very volatile area of our world, the globe. And and so stargates are places where aliens can come in and out.
So
And so Saddam Hussein,
wasn't that the reason for the Iraq War, or one of them for invading Iraq was to get to that
as I
one
was just
Stargate? Oh,
saying,
sorry.
Saddam Hussein. So Saddam Hussein, it wasn't over nukes, it was over the Stargate, which was under the museum where Saddam was letting in Anunnaki, who who again, their intention over us is to rule us. That's the same thing with Three Eye Atlas. That I have viewed Three Eye Atlas with other remote viewers who we all agree that that is run by the Anunnaki. So that is a return of the Anunnaki in that ship. And by the way, that ship has not continued outside our solar system what it was supposed to do. It has actually parked itself right next to Jupiter and is sitting there right now. And they have an agenda. That's another matter. So when you get into Israel and their relationship with the Anunnaki is that if you understand that the Anunnaki again were invaded by the reptilians and the Dracos, so their genome is basically a reptilian humanoid hybrid race. So when they put their genetics into us, and it apparently is all pervasive around the globe that everyone has some Anunnaki genes in their genome. They basically were inserting a certain degree of reptilian DNA, and the reptilian DNA is all about how the reptilian species are, which is they live off eating other species, specifically, especially humans. So they eat us, they have sex with us, and the blood drinking side of it as well. And that's true of the Greys as well. So when you look at the situation, the Adam Eve story was a story of genetic manipulation put into a little parable for the little children, the humans, as they were viewed. And unfortunately, these rabid religious people actually believe it literally. Eve did not have sex with a snake or even a reptilian. She didn't need to, because what they did is and put in the DNA of the reptilians into Eve, and ultimately all of their descendants and so on and so forth. So they have been invading us and staying here and are still here interacting with us since then. And this is supposed to be 450,000 years ago, at least according to these new tablets that have come forward. So when you look at the situation and you understand, you just need to know the personalities of the Anunnaki who wrote the Bible, who call themselves God and wanted humans to worship them on their knees, obey them at all costs, or they would kill them and ruin their lives, etc. So when Trump went out to read a section of the Bible, he read a section where we are being threatened yet again by the Anunnaki. And the Anunnaki established their main center in Israel under Dimona. And I got this from Whistleblowers. And the fact is that they are trying to run our world even to this day, and so on. So when you look into the Bible, you'll see the personalities and all the stories of the Anunnaki involve them acting just like humans. In other words, vindictive, jealous, wanting to rule over, being control, threatening, all this crazy stuff. So that's not a God. That's not creator God of the entire world of everything, obviously. They wanted to be worshiped. They wanted that kind of bullshit. So in the Bible, you can read the passages where that comes across in spades. And unfortunately, the excerpt that Donald Trump recently read, live to our basically the planet, but in particular the United States, contained all these threats that they always do over humans. These are Anunnaki. They're generally 6 to 9 feet tall. They're carved into the temples of Egypt, which I lead tours in Egypt, and Iraq, Iran, Libya, Syria, Lebanon, and so on. So they're very familiar in the Middle East of their, how they look. And they're very tall. Sometimes they're holding humans on their laps because they're trying to show you that they are are making you think that they're your forefathers. Now, before they got here, humans were already on the earth. And I don't mean Neanderthals. Actually, humanoids from Lyra had already come here and settled in certain parts of our planet. So the hybridization that they were doing was not with apes. Apes come from us. It doesn't go the other way around. So you don't get a higher level being from a lower level being. From us, they made the apes and the lower level beings. And so all these things are not known. They're known to me because of all my studies and all my, whistleblower testimony and so on and so forth. But most people just have been completely blinded by religion and lies. And part of that is to keep humans, you're sinners, you're terrible, you're all responsible for the evil on earth, you've done everything. When in reality, if you really want to look at it, the aliens invading us brought the wars with them. We didn't create the wars, they did. So this is what's happening here. And it's a different way of looking at everything. But once you understand it, you can see where the revealing of the alien, of the truth of Roswell and the truth of aliens is absolutely integral to us progressing to the next stage, especially with the technology. Now, the people in the secret space program are mixed, and so are the secret societies. The MJ12 group is split down the middle, according to Dan Burish all those years ago. Half wanted disclosure, the other half don't. So this has also been a war, if you will. The Vatican wants to own disclosure so they can still own you and tell you what to do and what to believe and so on and so forth, and pull the wool over people's eyes even further. So we're looking at, really, you can think of it as an age-old war to make the inhabitants of a planet know their real past, really understand who they are, where they came from, and what they're about. So all of that's been hidden from humans for so many years and lied about, that we have to break through all of that. And I don't know how well they're going to be able to do any of this with just Trump making some statements, And by the way, there's this synchronicity happening along those lines because Roswell happened in July of 1947. Trump is considered the 47th president, and he's going to disclose in July the reality of, in essence, the aliens that came at Roswell, because that's the first time humans really got a heads up that we'd been visited. So it's an interesting, I'm just saying how it's manipulated along these lines of numbers and numerology and all that stuff.
It's so interesting that you mentioned about the Anunnaki because Chris O'Connor and I had a long talk about it, and he talked about the Anunnaki actually at this time, and he can talk to you much more. It was a brief conversation, but are now in the process of having to help rebuild Earth as making amends for what they did. I don't know if you know anything about that, but that was
Well,
his thoughts on it.
supposedly, but
Yeah,
yes, there are supposedly good Anunnaki and negative ones. But the
right.
negative ones are still in charge, let's say, of Israel. And if you don't know that, all you have to do is look at the genocide of the Palestinian people, and you'll
Yeah.
understand. So Netanyahu is basically just a toy. He's a puppet of the Anunnaki. And a lot of governments are bowing down to the Anunnaki or have done through the ages. And then the Catholic Church is not under the Anunnaki, they're under the straight up reptilians, and they always have been. So there's a huge nest of reptilians under the Catholic Church. It's all in their architecture. You really can't get away from it if you ever visit the Vatican. So it's important to know that the Anunnaki in Israel, who are part reptilian, and the full blood reptilians that run the Vatican are also at odds with each other. All right. So this is a more complex sort of world war or war of worlds, if you like.
But I like to distinguish also because you have a dominating political force, let's say the reptilians or whoever is in charge over there, versus the people, the Jews that are completely have no idea about any of this and are often used as victims and consumed. There are people who will question whether or not the Holocaust actually occurred. I happen to have family that was wiped out, and I know that something happened. These people disappeared. Whether or not the numbers are true, I don't know. But there's a lot of overarching, like all Islamists or all Muslims or all Jews or this or that. And I just hope that people understand that humans are humans. Humans can't do those things to each other.
Well, I mean, there's a large, history of humanity that has made it through to this time. But there are tons of what is called hidden archaeology that will turn a lot of these sort of preconceptions or propaganda on its head when they are revealed. And it's slowly but surely being unearthed and discovered at this
Right.
time, which is a wonderful thing. We have really waves of energetics coming and hitting the earth that is facilitating this sort of desire and drive for truth at all costs. So this is not going to stop. Okay. It's just going to continue on. And at this time, certainly groups of humans are deceived in various ways. Some are also instruments of the dark side willingly, like they got on board with those kind of ideas. Apparently, Göbekli Tepe, which I have visited and done some short documentaries on, it's quite extraordinary because it is a very ancient site. Some people think it's as old as the pyramids, maybe even older.
Hmm.
And what is at Göbekli Tepe are these sort of T columns that had drawings on them of various beings, and they apparently had this ritualistic thing that went on. These things that went on, and they were sacrificing children. So one journalist who put it into a fiction book, not even fact, went there and investigated these ancient sects of the Jewish groups and the Khazarians and all of that, and found that these sacrificial groups are still alive and well and being operational to this day. But at the same time, they also, when they dug up to expose the architecture of Göbekli Tepe, they've discovered millions of skulls of little children. So this is what we're talking about, even going back
Right.
that far, So
Wow.
we have this history on Earth, and people may think it comes from humans, but it doesn't. It actually is under the direction of these various beings, but
Right.
specifically the Anunnaki. And this is in South America. It's all over the world, these kinds of sacrificial sites where this kind of thing has gone on, this obsession with bloodlust, which is really goes back to our DNA and various things of this nature also.
With the talk of ascension, whatever you want to call it, and the frequency shifting on Earth, what do you see happening in the future with these beings? Will they be able to function and even survive on this Earth with the higher frequency moving in? Do you have any hope, anything? Because I don't want people to leave this in doom and gloom and think they're going to be eaten by a reptilian. You know, what kind of hope can we leave people of what where the future is going?
Well, first of all, you should know that what happened in the secret space program was that they made deals with people like the dark side aliens, in order to gain their technology. And once they gain the technology, they no longer have to bow down to them. So now we are challenging, and that's why Trump is especially working with a part of the secret space program to challenge all of these old regimes that are run by aliens, actually, on Earth. Okay. So that's where he went to Venezuela with this. It's some of the technology is related and it's called the Golden Dome. And I
Yeah,
wrote an article about that. And Gene Ducode has been outing some of the technology that's involved there. But basically, it eliminates the ability to fight back and to use the weapon. They have all control of the weaponry, you know, the ELF waves and the scalar waves and various technology, particle beam weapons. Nukes is just the beginning of that whole story. So this is where Trump is taking over these countries and Iran because they have been run by the dark side aliens and been carrying out a lot of negative, you know, in the old parlance, it would be called terrorism on the planet,
right,
you know.
right.
But these are old, centuries old, you know, civilizations, older than the United States, in fact, of course, going and their technology and their access to the aliens and their technology. So this is where the wars in Iran and Iraq were both over the stargates and controlling the stargates and who can come in and who can come out. Because if you can understand that we're visited by many alien races, many of who want to come in here and take us over or take back the earth for themselves. And so what happens is we have to fight them. And if you have somebody like Saddam in Iran or one of the mullahs in Iran, basically opening the gates and letting some really bad beings in so that they can learn the technology and take over the world themselves with the help of those aliens, you know, we're going to be up shit creek, obviously.
Yeah,
So this is not just a war over oil and access to the Hormuz Straits of Hormuz. Now it is eventually going to also get rid of the oil economy, take away the dependency on oil and all of this stuff, and on the Middle East, and basically bring free energy forward
yeah,
in whatever way they manage to do it. But so understanding that this war with Iran is so much bigger and so much more complex than the average human is told on the street. And so it is very serious. I mean, there's nothing more serious than alien races coming in that want to take over our planet and coming in through stargates in places like Iran, where they themselves want to rule the world with Sharia law and all kinds of horrible stuff. So this is what we're looking at. Most Americans would be fully and completely behind the Iran war if they knew what I'm saying to
right,
you. But
right.
most of them don't because we have so much dissension between the left and the right and who's coming out with the truth. And this is why when what is probably the fake Trump recently read this excerpt from the Bible, that excerpt is about the third temple. And it is about the ETs threatening, outright threatening us or whoever's going to be building the third temple, assuming that the second temple is going to be decimated, bombed. You see, it's leading on to go down that road to where they think they're going to bring back the Antichrist and then eventually Christ. Okay, because they have this whole prediction. And especially in religious circles, especially the Catholics, and especially the Middle East. So it's a bigger story than I have time to tell here, but it is important to understand that you should not be taking lightly the fact that our so-called president, even a fake part of, because they always have fake presidents. That has been going on since Kennedy and before. It used to be common knowledge that we had duplicates of presidents. It's just, you have to have that, right? But in this case, there's one in particular, I'm told, who's around 5'8" and a little bit fatter than the regular Trump. Trump is 6'3". That some people are saying, like Benjamin Fulford, that he hasn't been seen in public since June of 2025. I think recently that gene decode or somehow it came up in that discussion that he had with this other person, was saying he hasn't been seen the real Trump hasn't been seen in public since 2018. I mean, there's all rumors everywhere about all of this, but I'm trying to sort of focus the mind here on that this is an ongoing trajectory, that this story isn't over yet, and that these sides that are sort of at war with each other are actually disclosing, by their actions you shall know them kind of thing. So we're seeing more and more outing of various things along these lines, and reading of the Bible verses where the primary, spokesperson, who isn't God the Creator, it is the Anunnaki, acting like Anunnaki always do, and threatening you if you don't do what they say, and basically get on your knees and bow down and do all this nonsense. So it's very important that people start reinterpreting the Bible, understanding how it really got made, and the fact that, in essence, people that are following the Bible are bowing down to an alien God. If you want to continue doing that, go right ahead. But I'm going to tell you that it's all going to be outed, and it's already started. And so the creator of all that is also yin and yang. So the East has a better understanding of that than the West. And so the creator is both good and evil. And that is what the multiverse is all combined of. And so this is what we're talking about. But yes, we will and are going through a certain kind of ascension. It's a rising of the frequency of the people, and people are even having awakenings happening right now. People that maybe didn't even understand, they took the COVID shot, they realized their mistake, they started to realize that Big Pharma was full of shit. I mean, all these things that some of us just knew from the get-go. Some of these people were clueless, completely clueless. So you have to understand that we are having an awakening, and that is leading to a kind of ascension. But I think that even the nature of ascension is misunderstood. There's a lot of fallacies and fantasies and all that go along with it.
Interesting. And now when you say the Bible, you're talking about the Old Testament and the New Testament?
Well, I'm not a Bible scholar, but what I've been suggesting recently is that you just take the Bible and put it into an AI and ask them to discover which, tell them about the Anunnaki, obviously, because they probably aren't even up to speed on that. I mean, AIs are very limited here on Earth. So unless you get an alien AI, you're not going to get the true history of humanity. But nonetheless, in theory, they should be able to go through the Bibles, both, the New and Old Testament, and tell you when the Anunnaki are speaking. They're not going to tell you God is the other person speaking, but there are references to a creator of all that is occasionally. So that is what it is. But what Jesus said, you could also analyze. And some of Jesus' sayings are excellent, In other words, he didn't come in peace, he brought a sword. That's a famous line from Jesus in the Bible. And the bottom line of that, why does he say that? If you don't understand it, then he didn't come to make violence. The sword symbolizes the mind and an ability to discern truth from falsity. This is what he's saying. So, and there's lots of those kinds of statements where you have to, be discerning and understand what you're being told. So there was an avatar named Jesus, but he's not coming back because he did a good enough job the first time. This is my point of view. It would be ludicrous for him to come back, but people like to think that he is. And this is where the third temple and the threats of the Anunnaki and all this is coming to the fore, because they believe when they create the third temple, already having destroyed the second, keep that in mind, hasn't happened yet, then what they're going to get in the future is the return of what three characters, supposedly. The Antichrist, the Mahdi, which is a Middle Eastern character who's supposed to make peace between the Antichrist and Jesus. So three players in that little scenario, that story, that fantasy. So this is where we're headed, apparently, according to prophecy. And people love to go into prophecy and believe it and all that kind of thing. The trouble is, a lot of times it isn't really accurate. It's always, depending on the time you view it, viewed from that time. And in some cases, they already thought it already happened, a bunch of times already, but it never did in theory. So, you can continue to believe all that. I have a disclosure witness called Leo Zagami, who was trained by the Illuminati in the P2 Lodge with, being exposed to the Vatican, the Black Pope, the whole thing. And he basically said that the Illuminati are going to act out the Bible. They're going to follow it word for word, and they're going to make sure it happens whether you like it or not. That's what Leo Zagami says. So they do seem to be hard at work trying to make this a reality. And if you just want to follow the story, Trump has just read to the American people a bunch of threatening lines about if they don't do this and they don't do that and how ruined they're going to be and so on and so forth. Understanding that that's about the third temple. So they're following the script.
Oh, I don't even know how to take all that in. I
Well,
think
you asked.
no. I know, I understand. It's a lot to take in. It's a lot to process. I don't consider myself a religious person. I'm more spiritual. I think for people who are deeply religious are going to have to sit with all that and discern what is true for them and what is not, and do their research. And I appreciate the people who are willing to put the information out there, and who have done all that work, because you probably have come under a lot of fire for saying things like that.
I guess I do, but I mean, what are they going to do? Kill me? I mean, this, my words are simply to wake you up. If it works and does help to wake up the people, then I've done my job, my mission here on Earth, and I'm very happy. Okay, so I also try to stress this with the White Hats and the leader of the White Hats, which is 107, who is actually JFK Jr. And he has his own, apparently, whether it's an act or not, I don't know, but he acts like a fundamentalist Christian and speaks like one constantly, which drives me crazy. So, yeah, I have my naysayers, of course, and really, I don't care if people want to believe me or not. I do think it's very important, and I hope I can set a precedent for making people go back and re-examining their belief systems, how much lies they've been told, and figuring out what's the truth and what's falsity. I think that's really our job to do.
Right.
And you're not going to have awakening, believe me, or ascension unless people do this. Okay. So ascension is not just, rising up to some fairyland heaven and you're done. That's not what ascension is. Okay. You need to qualify with your frequency for ascension. And that is a job that you cannot sort of control on a certain level. You have to actually, get fully engaged in doing that and awakening yourself to the lies you've been told. Because if you're living a lie, you're not going to ascend. It's just a fact.
Well, they talk
So,
about authenticity, right? Being the highest of all frequencies. And so for us, it's about, every day, I mean, all through these past 6 years of all of a sudden I'd be watching something, I'm like, clones? Like, it was like my head was ready to pop off my head, and I can't imagine my head just like spinning. Now someone just drinking out of a fire hose as more and more information, people who have been, doing the whole disclosure over a period of time may be able to take some of this in a little bit easier. But it takes a lot of courage to be you and to say the things that you do and go around the country and the world and do your research. And I want to thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming on. And I don't know if there's anything coming up that you want to let people know. Are you going to be speaking anywhere sometime soon?
well, I'll just give I guess, a plug to the 107 Fraud Fighters event that's happening in June 15th, 16th, and 17th in Vegas. And I think it's called the Fraud Fighters Summit. And I think you can put that into a Google search and find
Okay.
the actual ticket where he sells tickets. So I'm going to that event. He's not inviting me to speak.
I was just going to say, is he allowing you near him?
Well, I don't even know about that, but I can tell you that he may be there, but one of the other disguised ones may be there. So there's ways of telling them apart, and I have this on my website and so on and so forth. But I have friends that are coming as well, and so he's having a lot of financial people break down the financial fraud that we've been living with. I think it's kind of a precursor to them having their 10 days of darkness and their revealing of the new financial structure, the QFS. So that if you want to go to something like that, and if it interests you, then it is happening in June. So, he's basically feeding everybody for that price for 3 days, which is kind of insane. He expects around 500 people. I don't know if he's really going to get that many.
Yeah.
And so on. So other than that announcement, I'm not doing anything right now. I will be doing an Awake and Aware conference, but that's in England every year because I tried to do conferences in America years ago and I constantly was attacked mercilessly and got into some very dire straits financially as a result. And so I decided not to do anything in America. And I have a sort of a great, sort of business relationship that was set up with a woman who has this beautiful manor house and allows for 125 people. So we have a very small garden party kind of event in which we have wonderful speakers all day long. And you'll see me advertise it. And my website is projectcamelotportal.com.
Okay.
At the top of my website, I have all my social media links. So I'm on x.com where I post almost every day of my life. I'm on Telegram where I also post every day of my life. But you have to know that go from my links on my site to those places because I have copycats everywhere, fake me's, that are trying to take my, hits and make money off of me and all that kind of thing. So. But anyway, all the social media, all the links to all my videos, to Rumble, to Odyssey, to BitChute, and my website, of course, is there. But so it's projectcamelotportal.com.
Yeah. I'll put the link below. Kerry, thank you again so much. And I need you to stay on after we finish because I had to talk to you about something. But
Okay,
thank
sure.
you again. I really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.